What we want to do in this session is face the reality that we are seeking to do community development in a world dominated by institutions. And the issue I want to address is how can we develop communities in a world dominated by institutions. Now, I want to take as my patron saint for this presentation, St. Paul. And I want to refer to Paul's strategy for transforming the synagogue and use that as a model for how to turn our congregations inside out and upside down. But the same kind of strategy that I think that Paul used is relevant to any organisation that we want to work for change in. The first suggestion that Paul makes, I think, is very important. He says that we should approach every group and every organisation with a radical commitment to transformation. In Romans 12, Paul says, don't be conformed. Now that's a command, did you know that? Don't be conformed, but be transformed, right? By the renewing of your mind. We need to be mindful about what's happening in our world in general and in the institutions around us in particular. And we need to work for profound transformation. Now, the interesting thing about Paul is if you go on and read in Romans 12, that he actually then begins to paint a picture of the vision of the kind of community that he wants to create. And he says things like, love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love, honour one another above yourselves, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervour serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but be careful to do what is right in the sight of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So Paul is not just talking about any kind of transformation. He's talking about the kind of transformation that reflects the community of heaven on earth. A community that's safe, accepting, respectful, participatory, treats everybody as special, is committed to justice, not just us. Is that clear? If you look at that passage, you'll see all those characteristics in that passage. It's brilliant. That is a wonderful summary of the teachings of Jesus. Now, so what I'm suggesting is we need to go into every group, every organisation, every neighbourhood that we're a part of with that kind of vision. We're not there to conform, we're there to work for transformation. We want to develop these groups and organisations and neighbourhoods in such a way as they will reflect something of the divine community in the midst of that particular human group, organisation or neighbourhood. Is that clear? Now, Paul was very realistic. He followed Romans 12 with Romans 13. He says, I want you to be nonconformists, I want you to work for transformation, but be careful. They do not carry the sword in vain. And anybody who's a threat to the existing powers will use it against you. Now, Paul was very aware of that because he said, I have been imprisoned frequently, flogged severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods, and once I was stoned. So be careful. If you're working for transformation, they do not carry the sword in vain. Isn't that what he says? So Paul, in fact, says, be committed to transformation, but compromise as much as you can without compromising your commitment to transformation. That's how I read be subject to the authorities. Be committed to transformation, but compromise as much as you can without compromising your commitment to transformation. He says, in fact, he spells it out. He says, become all things to all people, compromise as much as you can, in order to save some, in order to work for transformation, individually and collectively. Is that clear? So I think that Paul's advice is really important, that if we need to go and work for transformation in every group, in every organisation, in every neighbourhood we're a part of, we need to be passionate about it, but we need to be really sensible. We need to be very realistic, that we need to go about it in a way that's sensitive, respectful, cooperative. We don't fight over every issue. We actually, kisses, like conflicts, should be saved for important occasions. Is that clear? So, right throughout, I want to use some examples. And I'll be using examples of how I worked using this strategy in the local church that I'm involved with. Now, let's look at the way that we gain entry into a particular group or organisation and what's required to work for transformation. The first thing I would suggest to you is that if we want to work for transformation within a particular group or organisation, we need to find a sponsor. Most institutions are like this, Isn't that true? And even though the people of God were told to leave the pyramids of state and the pyramids of stone behind in Egypt, when they got to Israel, the one thing they wanted to do is then reconstruct them. Even though God said, don't do it, but they did. Okay, and we're still doing the same thing today. So most groups and organisations look like that, like pyramids. And a sponsor is somebody higher up in the hierarchy who is sympathetic towards your vision for transformation and who will provide some kind of space for you to operate within the system. They won't necessarily participate with you in your experiment, but they will kind of encourage you, give you feedback, and guard your back. Now, when Paul went to a synagogue in Corinth, who were the people who were his sponsors? Yes, Priscilla and Aquila. That's right. They gained entry for him, and then they gave him feedback and they guarded his back when he got into trouble. Classic example. Is that clear? All right. Now, what I'd like to suggest to you, if you want to change a group or an organisation, if you can't find a sponsor, your chances are close to zero. Is that clear? I'm not saying you shouldn't try to change it. I'm just saying your chances are close to zero. All right? No, it's true. Even Jesus needed sponsors. The Pharisees were his sponsors, including people like Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, who kept an eye out for Jesus. And these close friends actually warned him when he was in trouble. Did you know that? They gave him advice, right? To protect him, to buy him time for his project. Do you understand that? Okay. So sponsors actually create the space and give us time to get our experiment going within the structure of an institution. When I wanted to work for transformation in a local church, I went to the local Baptist church. Because I'm a Baptist, I work for Queensland Baptist Services. And I said to the minister, look, I'm interested in getting involved with needy people in the neighbourhood. I'd be interested in collaborating with you in helping the church get involved with the poor. Are you interested in that? And he said, no. I said, why not? He said, we're a commuter church. People come in from all over the city to the church here and they don't want any trouble. Get involved with local people, it means trouble. Thanks, but no thanks. Okay? So it's really clear that he wasn't going to be a sponsor. All right? So I went down the road to the local Anglican church. And I said to the minister there, look, you know, I'm interested in getting involved with needy people in the neighbourhood. And he said, oh, come in, come in. And I said, oh, what's your name, by the way? And he said, oh, my name's John Arnold. And I said, oh, John, where did you develop this interest? He said, oh, I was with CMS in Pakistan. And I said, when were you there? And he said, oh. And we found out that he was in Pakistan the same time I was in India. We had a conversation in Urdu. And I thought, yes, here's a man who's committed to mission, who's concerned about the community at large and engaging the community at large. Is that clear? So I had a person who was my sponsor. The second thing that we need to do is then search for a couple of supporters. Now, the sponsor is in a position above us in the hierarchy, and they create the space for us and give us time and for our experiment. Supporters are people who are prepared to risk being involved in the experiment with us.
Just in terms of finding a sponsor, does it have to be a church, do you think, or can it be an organisation?
It's the same. It's the same for any group or organisation. You have to find a sponsor. I'm using the examples of church because a lot of us are involved in churches. But it can be university, it can be factory, it can be office, it can be a political party, the same processes. Okay? Now, what you're looking for in your supporters is, if you're here, you're looking for one or two other people with whom you can start to develop your alternative subculture within the dominant structure. You clear about that? Now, so when Paul goes to a synagogue, people like Priscilla and Aquila are sponsors, but he takes along his own supporters. Who are some of Paul's supporters? Barnabas, Luke, Demas, Simon, Epaphroditus. You know, there's lots. They're people who are actually prepared to risk in the grand adventure of transformation. They're going to get involved with him and try to make it happen. Are you clear the difference? It doesn't matter whether they've got a position in the hierarchy or not. That's not important. What matters is they're committed to mutuality. Is that clear? Do you understand that? That's very important. So when we got involved in St Andrew's Anglican Church with John Arnold as our sponsor, we got involved with a couple of people who were involved in the church and a couple of people who were not involved on the church, and but were interested in maybe attending, and just a few of us began attending the church and developing the kind of relationships in the church that we were hoping the church would be interested in taking on. Is that clear? Okay? All right. Now, I want to look at the strategies that Paul used then to transform that structure. Okay? The first strategy I'd like to suggest is a long-term strategy. Typically, when we try to change these institutions, the typical modus operandi is to organise a group of people at the bottom here to overthrow the people at the top here. Now, we can do that violently through revolution, or we can do that non-violently through elections. Right? Isn't that what happens? What is the problem with that as an approach for changing institutions? That's right. The more things change, the more they remain the same. In fact, it's worse than that actually, because normally the people up here aren't content to come back there. They normally go over here and start another one. And then those people oppose them, and they then go over here and start another one. This is the history of denominations. It is. Huh? So it's actually worse than useless. It's totally counterproductive. Now, the interesting thing for Paul is he was not interested in regime change, he was interested in system change. And he got it from Jesus. A lot of people think that Jesus